Hello everyone, Prosperity here. Legion will be coming to the World of Warcraft in a few weeks now, so I wanted to do a few videos to break down some of the changes that are coming to the classes and specializations before we get there. This series will guide your way through the skills you'll be using, starting with your active abilities and going on to cooldowns and talents from there. In today's video, I'm going to go over the Protection Paladin, looking at the base abilities you'll have at level 100 going into Legion. We'll start with the active abilities for this guide, which can be broken up into two subcategories, damage and utility. Your damage abilities are Avenger Shield, Hammer of the Righteous, Judgement, Shield of the Righteous, and Consecration. Utilities are Divine Steed, Hammer of Justice, Hand of Reckoning, Rebuke, and Light of the Protector. The first five, your damage abilities, shown on the screen, are your bread and butter for combat. These abilities are where your general threat generation comes from, as well as your active mitigation. Mastering the use of these five are crucial in order to become a good tank. Avenger's Shield lobs your shield at a target, dealing damage to and interrupting/silencing them and bouncing off to deal damage to 2 additional targets. This ability has a 15-second cooldown that can be reset by one of your passives, Grand Crusader. This is triggered mostly through your Hammer of the Righteous ability, but can be reset by avoiding an incoming attack. Use of this ability should be limited to being a backup interrupt for encounters with spellcasters, or if there aren't any around, your primary threat grab. If you're new to the class, don't worry about this so much, as it takes playing around with the ability to get a good feel of it. It should also be noted that the silence effect is only on non-player targets, making it ever so slightly less good in PvP. Hammer of the Righteous is a bit tricky, as it's basically the old Hammer of the Righteous and Crusader Strike rolled into one ability. It now has 2 charges with a 4.5 second recharge, and it only deals area of effect damage while standing in your Consecration, making your positioning even more crucial to effectively use this ability. Note that standing in your Consecration will not decrease the initial damage on your target, so it's safe to stand in it for any single target fights. Judgement has changed its role quite a lot over the years, but this incarnation of it makes a lot of sense for the playstyle of Protection. It still has its range and 6-second cooldown, but instead of activating a seal or granting a buff, Judgement now reduces the remaining cooldown on Shield of the Righteous by 1 second, or 2 seconds on a critical strike. Shield of the Righteous is still your source of active mitigation, but now requires a little something more to get the best possible use out of it. It now has 3 charges with a 16-second recharge, dealing an immense amount of single target damage and reducing all incoming damage by a baseline 25%, increased by your mastery, for 4.5 seconds. While standing in your Consecration, the effects are increased by an additional 20%, granting you a baseline 45% damage reduction before mastery is calculated in. You can work this in with well-timed uses of your Judgement to reduce the recharge time on this ability, easily making this the most powerful ability in your spellbook. Speaking of which, Consecration is now more important than ever, as you basically become a demigod while standing in it. Using Consecration does the same thing that it always has, damaging any enemy that is also in it. As you can tell from the description of the rest of your active damaging abilities, it's imperative that you become comfortable with finding the best spot to place it down. It has a 9-second duration and lasts for 9 seconds, so making sure that it's always on cooldown while you're stationary is absolutely necessary. The 5 utility abilities, shown on screen, are the second group of abilities you need to master for the Protection Paladin. Any tank can hold threat easily enough just by pressing their abilities, but what separates the exceptional from the average is effective use of your utility spells. Divine Steed is your mobility spell. It increases your movement speed by 100% for 3 seconds, making it extremely useful for repositioning yourself. Divine Steed has a baseline 45-second cooldown, so learning when to properly time the use of this ability will go a long way. Hammer of Justice stuns your target for 6 seconds and has a 1-minute cooldown. It also has a 10-yard range, making it one of the best stuns in the game. This is one of the only crowd control abilities you'll have access to as a Protection Paladin. Hand of Reckoning is your main taunt ability, causing one target to attack you and increasing your threat generation against it for 3 seconds. This ability is useful for boss pulls, but should be reserved for taunt swaps between 2 tanks as it has an 8-second cooldown. Successful use of this ability can mean the difference between a wipe and a kill, so if it is at all possible to gain threat from one of your DPS or healers by any other means, use that instead. Avenger's Shield is an exceptional alternative. Rebuke is your main interrupt ability, stopping a spell from being cast and preventing all spells of that spell's school from being cast for 4 seconds. This is very similar to Avenger's Shield, but has a 15-second cooldown that doesn't reset, meaning this should be reserved for if you've just used Avenger's Shield and need to interrupt another spell immediately. Between these two abilities, you should have no problem always having an interrupt available in any situation. It should also be noted that the silence effect of Rebuke also works on player characters. Last but certainly not least, Light of the Protector. This is one of the new spells for Protection Paladins, replacing Word of Glory as your primary self-healing spell. Light of the Protector heals you for a whopping 25% of your missing health, and an additional 20% if you're standing in your consecration. This spell has a 15-second cooldown and is mostly used to give your healers a bit of a reprieve from healing you, or to help keep yourself alive in periods of heavy raid-wide or party-wide damage. It should be saved for if you are at or below 30% health, which, used in concert with a damage reduction cooldown or active mitigation, can help you get to a safe health range without draining your healer's mana. Let's recap. Your main goals as a Protection Paladin are to generate and maintain threat with Hammer of the Righteous, Shield of the Righteous, and Avenger's Shield. Get maximum uptime on Shield of the Righteous with Judgement, control the encounter with your utility spells, and make sure you're standing in your consecration at all times to get those sweet bonuses. Protection Paladin is one of the most straightforward tanking classes in the game. I hope this guide has helped you to learn some of the basics of the class. In the next video, I'll be going over the passives and cooldowns for the spec, and after that, talents and the artifact weapon Truthguard. Subscribe to keep an eye out for these guides and more, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below, or on Twitter at TheLoranzis. Thanks for watching, and as always, have fun.